Everyone thinks this lawsuit is about a movie, a contract, or bruised egos. But what if the real danger isn't the courtroom at all? What if the biggest threat is something no publicist can spin and no settlement can erase? Because buried inside these filings is a contradiction so serious, it doesn't just undermine the case, it potentially opens the door to consequences that follow people forever. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand why this legal gamble could change everything. This story does not start where people think it starts. Not with a courtroom filing, not with a headline, not even with a movie release. It starts with a quiet decision that most audiences never see. A decision about how power is structured, how money flows, and how identity is defined behind the scenes. Because in this industry, the most important choices are not the ones made on camera, they're made on paper. And those papers tell a story that is very different from the public narrative. The public sees a star, a project, and a dispute, but the documents reveal a strategy, a structure, and a risk that grows larger the longer it is ignored. And once that structure is put under a legal microscope, it stops being flexible, it stops being theoretical, and it becomes fixed in black and white. And that is where things get dangerous. Because when someone benefits from one definition of themselves in one system and then asks another system to accept the opposite definition, the gap between those two positions becomes the most important part of the entire story. And this is where part one begins, with the idea of classification, not as a boring technical detail, but as the backbone of everything that follows. Because classification determines how money is paid, how expenses are treated, how responsibility is assigned, and how protection works. Classification is not cosmetic, it is foundational. And in the entertainment world, one of the most common structures is the Loanout company, a structure designed to treat the individual not as an individual, but as a business entity. And when someone works through that structure, they are not just choosing convenience, they are choosing a legal identity that comes with benefits and obligations. And those benefits are substantial, because a business can deduct costs that an individual employee cannot. A business can structure income differently. A business can control timing, expenses, and exposure in ways that a regular employee never could. And this is why this structure exists, and why it is used by people at the highest levels of the industry. And it works because everyone involved agrees on what it is. A company contracts with another company, services are provided, payment is made, taxes are handled later by the receiving entity, and the production does not withhold employment taxes, does not provide benefits, does not insure the individual as an employee, and does not treat the relationship as employment. And for years, this arrangement functions smoothly because it aligns with reality. The reality that the individual is operating as a brand, a business, and a commercial entity, not just a worker showing up for a paycheck. And this is where the tension begins to form, because once that structure is in place, it cannot be selectively ignored when it becomes inconvenient. The same structure that allows deductions also defines status. The same paperwork that allows flexibility also locks in classification. And the moment someone asks a court to retroactively redefine that relationship, the entire structure comes under scrutiny, not just for the purpose of damages, but for consistency across systems. Because courts do not operate in isolation. They exist alongside regulatory bodies, financial authorities, and enforcement mechanisms that pay attention when high-profile cases contradict prior representations. And that attention does not turn off once a verdict is reached. It often starts there. And the reason this matters is because the argument being made is not simply that something went wrong on the set or that a dispute arose during production. The argument reaches much deeper. It asks the court to accept that the individual was effectively an employee despite years of conduct, documentation, and financial treatment indicating otherwise. And that request does not exist in a vacuum. It collides with prior filings, prior payments, and prior benefits taken under a different classification. And when those two worlds collide, the narrative shifts from grievance to exposure. Because now the question is not just who owes what, but who said what, when, and under what authority. And that is where the risk multiplies, because proving employment status requires more than feelings or experiences. It requires demonstrating control, integration, and dependency in ways that are consistent across the record. And when the same individual is simultaneously claiming business losses, brand impacts, and independent commercial harm, it sends mixed signals to the very decision makers being asked to rule. And this is not about intent or character, it is about alignment. And alignment is what courts look for when credibility is tested. Alignment between contracts, conduct, filings, and claims. And when that alignment breaks, the case does not just weaken, it invites examination from angles that no one originally planned for. And this is why the early filings matter so much, because they set the tone, they frame the identity of the parties, and they reveal whether the strategy is coherent or conflicted. And in this situation, the conflict is not subtle, it sits at the center of the claims. One moment, the narrative relies on the protections of employment, the next, it relies on the autonomy of entrepreneurship. And those two positions cannot coexist without explanation. And courts are not obligated to ignore that contradiction simply because the story is compelling. And as this unfolds, the stakes move beyond compensation or accountability. They move into classification consequences that reach far beyond a single case. Because once a court record states a classification, it becomes a reference point, a citation, a document that other institutions can examine and interpret. And that is why this moment is pivotal, not because of the personalities involved, but because of the structure being challenged. And in part one, the foundation is set, the identity chosen, the benefits taken, and the risks that now follow quietly but persistently as the case moves forward. And as the narrative continues, the question is no longer what happened on set, but what happens when two legal identities collide, and neither can fully erase the other. As the case moves forward, the focus quietly shifts from emotion to evidence. And this is where the story becomes less about perception and more about patterns, because courts do not decide identity based on how someone feels during a project. They decide it based on how that person operated before, during, and after the work was performed. And this is where consistency becomes everything. Consistency in contracts, consistency in payment structure, consistency in tax treatment, consistency in public behavior, and consistency in private strategy. Because when those elements align, they reinforce each other. And when they diverge, they expose fault lines that cannot be explained away by passion or frustration. And the most important thing to understand here is that employment status is not awarded as a favor. It is determined through a multi-factor analysis that looks at control, independence, and integration. And those factors are not isolated moments, they are trends. And when someone maintains creative autonomy, negotiates compensation through a corporate entity, controls branding, leverages promotional opportunities for separate commercial ventures, and assumes responsibility for their own expenses, those are not the hallmarks of traditional employment. Those are the indicators of independent operation. And the more those indicators appear, the harder it becomes to reverse the conclusion later without unraveling everything else tied to that identity. And this is why the damages theory matters so much, because damages are not just numbers, they are reflections of how someone views themselves in the economic ecosystem. And when the claimed harm centers on business brands, marketing pipelines, and long-term commercial equity, it signals that the core injury is entrepreneurial, not employment-based. And that distinction is critical, because employees generally seek remedies tied to wages, benefits, and workplace protection, while businesses seek remedies tied to lost opportunity, brand dilution, and disrupted revenue stream.
And explanation requires acknowledging trade-offs, and those trade-offs can undermine the very relief being sought. And this is where the momentum of the case slows, because every assertion must be weighed against the totality of conduct, and every argument must survive comparison with past representations. And that comparison is not limited to the opposing party. It extends to the record itself, which has no incentive to be forgiving. And this is why the middle phase of cases like this is often the most consequential, not because of dramatic hearings, but because of quiet assessments happening behind the scenes, assessments about risk exposure, collateral consequences, and the wisdom of pushing a theory that may succeed in one forum while creating vulnerability in another. And this calculation is especially important when public visibility is high, because visibility amplifies impact, and impact attracts attention, and attention invites review, and review is rarely narrow once it begins. And this is not speculation, it is structural reality, because systems communicate with each other through records, through findings, and through outcomes. And when a record states something definitively, other systems take notice, not because they are adversarial, but because they are interconnected. And that interconnectedness means that choices made in one arena echo in others. And this echo is what makes the case more than a dispute. It makes it a case study in how modern celebrity commerce intersects with law and governance, and how the lines between personal brand and professional role have consequences that extend far beyond a single project. And as part 2 closes, the tension is no longer about whether a claim can be made, but whether it should be made, given the ripple effects it may create. And that question lingers unresolved, because the answer depends not on passion or principle, but on risk tolerance. And risk tolerance varies, but the record does not. And the record will say what it says long after strategies change and narratives shift. And that is where the suspense truly lives, in the quiet space between what can be argued and what can be lived with once the argument becomes part of history. What makes this moment so consequential is not the noise surrounding it, but the silence that follows once the record is complete. Because courts eventually stop listening to explanations and start reading conclusions, and those conclusions live far longer than any public debate ever will. This is where strategy meets consequence, and where every choice made earlier is reflected back without emotion or context, just facts, structure, and alignment. And once that happens, there is no editing, no reframing, and no undo button. The identity presented becomes the identity preserved, and that preservation carries weight across systems that were never part of the original fight. Which is why this situation feels so tense to observers who understand how interconnected everything is. Because the risk is not isolated to one outcome, it branches outward, touching finances, reputation, and future leverage. And the irony is that the same sophistication that allowed success in building brands, negotiating deals, and managing public image is now what raises the stakes. Because sophistication implies awareness, and awareness narrows the margin for innocent explanations. And as the case reaches its later stages, the focus naturally shifts from proving a point to managing fallout. Because even a favorable ruling can come with consequences that were never part of the original goal. And this is why settlements discussions and strategic pauses often appear at moments like this, not because one side is weak, but because both sides understand that winning is not always the same as surviving intact. And that calculation becomes especially sharp when public narratives collide with private records, because audiences move on, but documents do not, and institutions do not forget what has been formally stated under oath. And this is the part of the story that rarely makes headlines because it lacks spectacle, but it is the part that determines what comes next, quietly, steadily, and without drama. And it serves as a reminder that power in modern celebrity culture is built not just on visibility, but on structure. And structure demands consistency. And when consistency fractures even slightly, the consequences may not arrive immediately, but they arrive eventually, and they arrive thoroughly.
And this does not mean that outcomes are predetermined or that every risk becomes reality, but it does mean that choices carry weight beyond their immediate purpose, and that awareness is what separates momentary reactions from long-term strategy. And as this chapter closes, the most important